This kept happening for years. Over and over again, I try and have a serious conversation about something. People would find a hole in it. They'd point to it and they'd be like, well, I guess I have to go down that rabbit hole now. So eventually, after like 15 plus years of studying this monstrosity, which is itself a deliberate creation on behalf of an entity, and that entity is something which is, in essence, anti human, be it itself actually human and just hates humanity, or is something that is not human and hates humanity. Either way, that's what's going on. We've got this thing that is very against life, and it is very pro synthetic transhumanist way of living and trying to back us into the box where that is the only acceptable thing. Oh, by the way, that's a death cult. That's what that actually is. It's this, here's this magical futuristic world that can, no, that's death. They're trying to goad you and lure you into your death. And they're doing it with a bunch of like sexy pamphlets that are designed to appeal to your baser instincts. It becomes a lot more glaring once you enter into like esoteric and metaphysical conversations, which, depending on everyone's grasp of science, religion, and their perspectives on culture and their just personal disposition, becomes very murky waters. What it's really, I'll describe it this way. On the surface, there's corporations. Under that, there's governments. Under that is deep states. Under that is secret societies. Under that are ideologies. And under that is what is actually objective and inherent to nature, what is actually true. Things start from that actually objectively true, but we perceive them based on the layer or level that we're at or have the most engagement with. Most people have engagements with corporations, or they'll work for a government in some sort of bureaucratic offshoot, be it with healthcare or something like that. Some people will be in a secret society, but they won't necessarily be in the inner rings of that secret society when it then punctuates and goes all the way to social engineering. And if they do have some ideology, a lot of the time it'll be more of like how the Jewish people have been used by Talmud extremists over the course of their evolution, unbeknownst to a lot of that Jewish population, because they can't conceive that someone who holds their belief would use it as a leash. So what we are is a generation that's been born into generation after generation after generation who has had a similar leash tied onto them. And now we're at a point where it's like the gloves are kind of coming off in a way. And we're all like, all right, well, what is really going on? What is objectively actually inherent to nature? How does that actually work? And let's remove those different contextual lenses of perspective that so occult and blind our perspective on what's behind on the surface level. That is so much that it literally, like Hervora had mentioned that I created my show Conspiracy Synergy. It is the last 4 years of work for me have been less than 10 hours of media that I've created. And that's because of how much it takes to distill this much information down to something that is palatable and digestible for the layman. We are at a period of time where if you do not get your friends and family to start to wake up to the reality, they will eventually be weaponized against themselves and one another. The mentality that we have had the luxury of entertaining our lives, more or less, and those which preceded us, is that, oh, well, we can just go off into the woods and escape somehow. No. It's worse now because it is that global technocratic control grid. So this means that we actually do need an education in the objective reality of what is happening, whether or not it is comfortable for us on an individual level, a communal level, or a societal level. That means a whole lot of being really, really uncomfortable a lot of the time. And then at the same time, bumping into our own individual and societal egotism and the threshold of how wrong we had it before. That is very difficult for us to do as people, to admit that we were wrong, to amend and try and do better for the ramifications of having been so wrong, and then to actually change the direction that we were going in and to choose the right direction instead. So that's what we're experiencing right now. We were being pushed off a ledge by these social engineers, trying to turn as many people into the meat grinder as they possibly can, promising them a falsehood of transhumanism that will never manifest for the average person. It is only the sales pitch for the elite who themselves believe it, that are so far up the ass of the death cult that they are themselves entwined with, that they can't even recognize that they themselves were lied to, because they think that by having sold their soul earlier on, by doing the devil's dirty work, that means that they're going to cash out. No, it means that they get closer to feeling like they're going to cash out, only to have it all crash down at the last moment. That's how evil works. It is a death cult, objectively inherent to nature, and then it sells you a far better looking brochure because of the PR campaigns that they manage. That's how the whole thing works. If you actually get into studying these people, and it's a rings within rings infrastructure, it's intergenerational, and it's one of those things where it's structured much akin to a caste system, which is old money kind of sort of thing, but it also uses new money as a functional extension. So it's all one big club is the very easy way to describe it, but there are tiny, smaller incremental degrees of refinement within that club that till eventually you reach a very, very sharp point. Now, that sharp point is the tip of the spear in the sense of those who are actually doing this on the level of Kissinger and beyond. For the most part, people are just useful idiots. They're just existing within these systems. We'll go along with it. They did. It was like I'll tell it as an anecdotal story because I don't remember the exact peer-reviewed wording, but they had people trying to follow a robot out of a burning building, and they would continue to follow the robot even if it was going into the flames. So a whole lot of people exist in systems in which they are hopefully dependent on those systems and themselves have no freaking idea what they're doing. When you actually get into like Council of Foreign Relations, like Royal Institute of International Affairs, like Esalen Institute, all of these kind of stuff that are the working groups of the tip of the spear, even most of those people don't even really understand what's going on. They would be very difficult to talk to about that level because it would be irreconcilable to the version of the story that they were told. When you actually get to the tip of the spear level of people, when we're talking about like intergenerational pedophilia as a control mechanism, when you're starting to trigger dissociative identity disorder as a way of programming, when you start to go into the refinement of torture for millennia and how hardcore those people are to a point where from a Christian perspective, they aren't even human anymore. They're literally just a pact with the devil. Once you get into that level, there is no end to depravity. It does not stop at the idea of feeding people to each other. I mean, you can look at fetal tissue being in vaccines as an example of them already pushing that. You can argue that they're poisoning the food supply. All of these different things that are done as ritualistic blood sacrifice in the factory farming infrastructure, whether you're for or against meat, that is still ultimately a satanic ritual that's going on 24/7. So when you start to understand things in a ritualistic, energetic, refined, esoteric practice that goes on for millennia and is being perpetrated behind the superficial auspices of the labels through which we view bureaucracies, that's a long stretch of refinement. The people who are at the tip of the spear, they are going to go to that place that you described as. Everyone else beneath them, they're just going to go along with it because they want their paycheck. But yeah, they're going to go there.